Hello, welcome to my channel, another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and this is my reading report wrap-up for books I finished reading on 7/23. It was a pretty good reading week, not the best. The weather out here in Virginia is still utterly miserable, so I am falling a bit behind again on my audiobook listening just because my morning walks have to be cut short because you walk outside for a half hour and you're thoroughly drenched in sweat. So what books have I finished? The first was The Snow Was Dirty by George Simenon. This was read for my booktube at War project, and it was an audiobook. George Simenon is more famously known for his Magritte series of police procedural novels, but this is a crime novel set in occupied France. I think it's set in Paris, even though it's not explicitly said it's Paris. It's some city in France that's been occupied. So I'm just going to go ahead and say it's Paris, even though he never mentions it. It is a story of Frank, who is 18, 19 years old. Now, I'm kind of wondering why he's called Frank. I think that's just the translation. Who's trying to anglicize the name. Maybe it was Francois in the original French. I don't know. But it sort of disturbed me that the author kept referring to his character's name as Frank. Now, maybe that is a perfectly acceptable French name that I'm just totally ignorant, but it sort of bothered me. Well, anyway, Frank is a petty criminal. He lives with his mother, who runs a brothel. And he is known to have fun with the girls in the brothel. And one night there is a German known as the Eunuch. And he decides, I'm going to kill this German and steal his pistol. And that's the start of the story. And they said, very existential. It's all about Frank's thoughts, his idea of what it means to kill a man. And even though there was this stealing of the pistol, it was more just for the fun of killing a man, saying, I have never killed someone before. I need to learn how to kill people. And that was his main motivation. And then he murdered another person, an old woman who had some watches that he could sell for a profit on the black market. And then it goes into his psychology as people are being investigated for these crimes. A neighbor in his building has been arrested for the murder of the German officer. And of course, Frank doesn't say a word. And I really enjoyed this book. It's very atmospheric. But Frank is not a pleasant character. He is a thug. He is mean. He has no conscience. One of the other things he wants to do is for one of his buddies, is Frank is seeing a girl who is a virgin. And she's not sure she's ready to give up her virginity. And what he wants to do is get her to give it up, but substitute his friend for himself when it comes to doing the actual deed. And I'll leave it at that. It is set during World War II, and there are German officers, but the war itself is very distant in this book. The next book that I read is from the Edge series by George G. Gilmore. This is a very violent series of very pulpy westerns. George G. Gilmore is the pen name for a British man. When he wrote his first book in the Edge series, The Loner, or was it The Loser? I can't quite remember. He had never read a Western before, but he had watched The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And that's how he got his start writing Westerns. And The Edge is a man who came home from the Civil War to find that his brother had been murdered. And that was in book one. And book one was him setting out to seek revenge for his brother's murder. And the Edge commits murders almost as brutal as the murderers that got his brother. Well, anyway, in book two, picks up right where book one left off. I don't think it'd be absolutely necessary to read book one. Probably would help, but he is at the end of book one been appointed temporary sheriff of a town, and some Mexican bank robbers have come in and stolen from the bank, and more importantly, stolen money that belonged to Edge. He had hidden it, and they found it. So he had to go get his money back. And along the way, he finds an old man who says, I was a robber once. I have $10,000, 10 grand in dollars, American, hidden away in Mexico. So of course, everyone is out for this 10 grand. And Edge, he has to fight his way to get that money. And what happens when he finds the money and eventually gets to this small Mexican town? I liked this more than the first book. I can see the author getting a little more practice writing novels. The first one was very disjointed, a lot of scenes that just sort of filled in chapters, but this one has more of a cohesive story. So I am actually looking forward to getting on to book three in this very violent, pulpy Western book. The Right Side by Spencer Quinn. This is the choice of my in-person book group. Last video, I described it as a woman in the military who had her face severely damaged, and then called it a dog book, which is technically correct, although a little misleading. It is the story of a woman in the military named Leanne, and she is a sergeant. Now, before you get to it, is like I say, is she was going to go off to West Point to become a career military officer, and then her father died under circumstances that are a little odd. He was heavily drinking, and it's sort of implied that it might be a suicide. So what does she do? She withdraws from West Point and enlist as a common soldier in the military. That didn't ring true to me. But when she's serving in the military, she gets sent off to Afghanistan and get caught in an incident with someone who has an explosive, and she loses a right eye. Now, her face is a little damaged, but not as severely damaged as I thought it was going to be. But she has no right eye. And then she's in the Naval Medical Hospital recovering in Bethesda, Maryland. And her roommate also dies suddenly. And so she goes out on the lam because she's just very distraught and not dealing with life very well. Until you get to about halfway through the book when she finds a stray dog. And it does turn into a dog book because the most likable character in this book is a dog. And it's all about how she is going to heal herself with the love of a dog. Now, my wife read this too. She finished it last night. She kind of liked it. She didn't like the first half of the book, which was dealing with more of the military issues in her PSTD. PSTD. But she really liked it once the dog came into play. And yet, I agree. The book got a whole lot better when the dog came on the scene. But I don't think it's a great book. I think it's a very weak book. There's a lot of subplots that or at least one or major subplot they didn't get into. And it just sort of feels all jammed together and not cohesive. It's like he wanted to set up an interesting character, had to get all these incidents to get her where she's suffering PSTD, and then are introduced to her dog. And, it's okay. It's a fine book. It's entertaining, but nowhere near a great book. Last one I finished, and I've been reading this over the past 2 weeks, actually, read a couple of comics. This is Tales from the Crypt. These are 50s horror comics. And they're very quaint in some cases. When I first started reading this, especially the first half, um, I won't give too much away, but they're more suspense stories than horror stories. I said it's the times in the 50s. You had the comics code, which was really ruling over them, and they could not go to areas that you would think these kind of stories would want to go to. But I enjoyed them, and as I got further along in the book, I noticed that the stories got a little more bold. Now, if you were to rank supernatural stories, but how much supernatural is in a story, you would have zero, which is absolutely no supernatural at all, or you would have novels of Stephen King, which he tries to ramp them up, past 10 to 11, especially the end of his books. If you go through the first few stories, you're going 0 to 1 in the supernatural scale. The 1 because maybe it's supernatural, maybe it's not supernatural. Maybe there's a rational explanation. And then slowly you get into the book and they start getting that dial up a little to 2s and 3s. And that's kind of the area where I like my supernatural and my horror. I don't like a whole lot of magic that happens. I like it to be mysterious and strange and not quite able to explain with rationality. Just say, okay, maybe if you stretch rationality, you can make that happen, but there's a little bit of that oddness. And what I also really kind of find amusing in this is that they reproduce the ads that these kids in the 50s would have seen, and it's amusing to read these old ads. Especially, I don't know if I can find it right now. And I found, oh yeah, here's one. I just found this absolutely bizarre to be in this book. Hold on. Comic Bible stories in a horror comic. Okay, I guess it's the 50s, and they thought the kids of that age really should be reading their Bible stories, along with their tales from the crypt. And I find that highly amusing. So, what am I currently reading? I am reading An Immense World by Ed Yong. This is an audio book. It is up for a BookTube Prize nomination, so I'm going to have to be very careful what I say about that, so I don't accidentally influence other booktubers. I am also reading a book that I could have read for Garbagus if I read early, Wolf Moon by David Irons. It's about a werewolf in space. I'll save the review for next week. So, thank you very much for watching, and keep on reading.